Assalamu alaikum everyone. Philosophy is haram, and that's it. That's basically the video. Or is it? This is what we are going to talk about in today's video, and by the end of it, I want to show you that this is not as simple as you may think. Because see, nowadays there are two sides, especially recently, there has been a back and forth between some of our Muslim brothers. It has been pretty normal that there are some people who think that philosophy is either haram and universally haram, and then there are some who think that philosophy universally is halal. This is a problem. This is a problem, and I want to show you that it is not as easy as people might think. Well, because they're kind of both. They are both halal and both haram. But you see, the philosophy isn't just one thing. And I'm not talking about different fields of philosophy, but rather how philosophy has been defined completely differently throughout history. I'm not really talking about metaphysics, axiology, or epistemology. Rather, I'm talking about how we define it completely differently, or at least very differently, to what the scholars defined it as, and what they meant when they said philosophy or falsafa. Before I get into it, why is this important? Why is it important for me to first not only describe or define philosophy, but rather define philosophy in two different time frames? See, this is important because we are not just dealing with philosophy of one time. The reason that a lot of our brothers who say that philosophy is haram, and I love them for that, because the reason that they're saying it is to protect the religion, to keep people away from heresy, and this shows that their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their Muslim brothers and the deen, and we have to love and respect that. But you see, the meaning of philosophy, the word philosophy, has changed throughout the years so drastically that we may mean completely something else. So what do we mean? Let's first discuss that. Then let's discuss what did the scholars such as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala meant when he said falsafa. Especially, we will be discussing about the contingency argument and why that argument is so problematic. In a sense, we have two philosophy that is relevant to us in today's video. Let's start off by defining modern philosophy. So what is modern philosophy, or what we call philosophy in today's world in the academia? So philosophy, like Alvin Plantinga says, that philosophy is just thinking hard about things. So basically just thinking hard about things, and in an attempt to explore our reality and question other disciplines, and to try to discover and think about the foundations of other disciplines, is just philosophy. So basically just being rational and using your rationality to understand things. This is philosophy. But is this what our scholars meant when they said that Ibn Sina is a kafir? Ibn Sina and the likes of other philosophers who followed him? This is the point. Philosophy was more than just a discipline or a method. Rather, the falasifa had become more of a school of thought, a school of aqidah that had been mixed with religion, because of the reasoning and rationale and the thought of the Greek philosophers. And these were the falasifa. These were the people who were called the falasifa, such as their idea of the universe being eternal, or of rejecting the bodily resurrection, or about God not having knowledge of the particulars, rather only of the universals. This is a complicated topic which I will not be diving into. So stuff like that. And most importantly, ideas such as the Neoplatonic idea of God, where they ended up denying God's attribute in the real sense. So let's take an example, right? For the falasifa, okay, ilmul ilahi which we would nowadays call metaphysics, right? Which we would say is the existence of reality, what is real and what is reality, and try to explain that and study it. Rather, for them, ilmul ilahi was a study of God himself and his attributes, and also the reality of God himself. So this ended up resulting in heresies and eventually kufr for many, which is true. But even in falsafa of their time, everything was not necessarily haram. Because you see, as Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Ihya Ulumuddin, I believe in volume 1, he says that philosophy is actually 4 different fields, which includes maths or geometry, to be more precise, which he says is halal mostly, and we should study it. There's no problem with studying it. And then logic, and then he says that the third one is theology, and then the fourth one is natural sciences, which would be physics and stuff like that. So here we see that even in their time it wasn't necessarily haram, and our scholars did study it. So Imam Al-Ghazali did study, and he knew, he had the knowledge about falsafa, but he still wrote a book on the incoherence of the philosophers, Tahafud al-Falasifa. Why would he do that? If he knew that not everything in philosophy was haram, why did he refute the philosophers? Because you see, the philosophers had heretical views and people were getting convinced by them. This was a problem, and it was the duty of the scholars to refute them, and many did, such as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. So do the people who say that philosophy universally is haram not realize that where we got Pythagoras' theorem from? Pythagoras was a Greek philosopher, and they might just say that, well, Pythagoras' theorem didn't affect Pythagoras' creed or belief in God. Well, that is actually kind of wrong, because Pythagoras did believe that maths was fundamental reality itself, and his followers did believe in weird stuff which spewed into their creed. So if that's not the case, we do take knowledge which are beneficial and we leave which is harmful. There's no problem in that. So when the scholars, they said that philosophy is haram or dangerous or bid'ah or anything along those lines, they meant a very specific kind of philosophy, not necessarily philosophy as a whole. Okay, we need to understand that our scholars were geniuses, and I can guarantee you, people who talk against Imam Al-Ghazali or people who talk against Ibn Taymiyyah, most of them cannot read their books, and even if they speak Arabic, cannot understand what they're saying, because they're talking at an intellectual level which is way above them. So these scholars were actually against, to be more precise, Ibn Sina's philosophy or Aristotelian philosophy and logic, not logic itself or not irrational argumentation itself. And I think both parties agree to it. Every Muslim agrees to this. But what is wrong with some of the arguments? Let's take the example of the contingency argument. See, first of all, the contingency argument in the Arabic words or the Arabic terminology would be dalilul imkan, which would be literally would translate as the argument from possibility, something around that. Now, if I say that everything in the universe is dependent, hence it must be dependent on something that is independent, this doesn't really seem haram. This kind of argument or this kind of notion has been in the Quran to remind us that we are all dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a sign for the people who think. There's no problem in this. Then why did Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah say that this argument doesn't prove the God but only a necessary being? Because Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was against the contingency argument of Ibn Sina without a doubt, right? And he even went further and said that even atheists believe in such a necessary being. So what does this mean? What is the problem here? Why is there such a confusion here? The issue is that Ibn Sina and his understanding and his philosophy, the way that they, the philosophers, the followers of Ibn Sina and Aristotle, the way that they ended up understanding God was not in a personal being that is worthy of being worshipped. So the way that they understood God was a thing that is necessary without a free will and is only existence or is only essence without attributes as well. That's it. That's kind of basically it, which no Muslim really said, no companion said, no prophet said. So this was very problematic, and they definitely, without doubt, used the contingency argument to prove this, to prove that the God has no attribute. In reality, he's just essence or he's just existence, and then this God has no free will in the sense that everything is determined by him, and he could not have necessarily done otherwise. And the philosophers did believe that God couldn't have done otherwise because there is no such thing as otherwise. So the issue is not that the necessary being is being proved by the arguments or methods or syllogisms. Okay, so the issue is not me saying that everything is contingent or dependent, and everything being contingent or dependent proves that there is a single necessary existence. The issue was that the Aristotelian kind of philosophy, which consisted of weird ideas about what the necessary being is, I rejecting real free will and attributes. And we also need to realize that the word contingency is not an Arabic word. The word is rather new when it comes to these kind of arguments comparably, and our scholars did not use these words. This is a modern word. Any argument that is used with these terminologies of contingency, meaning possibility or dependent things, to prove a thing that is independent, can be said to be a contingency argument. There are many contingency arguments out there which prove different kind of things, meaning that the Ibn Sina kind of contingency argument, and his goal is to prove, and to some people it does prove, that God has no attributes, while there are other contingency argument and all it does is prove that we are dependent on something that is independent, and there's only one thing that everything is dependent on. And such an argument can be used against Hindus to prove monotheism. We'll say that everything can only be dependent on one thing, not two things, which is fine. So I'll leave you guys with that. What do you guys think? Do you think that philosophy is haram or halal? Let me know in the comments, and leave a like, subscribe, because this video took some time. I asked my shuyukh a bit about this topic to correct some things. So leave a like, it'll help with the reach, and with this video might reach the people who might need it. And with that, let's clear people's doubt and let's bring forward the haqq and give everyone dawah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.